Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Grayzone. It's been a while. Has it been a month? 2 weeks? I honestly can't remember, but sorry to deprive you of all the quality content we so dependably deliver. I was in Iran, and it was really difficult to live stream from there for logistical reasons. It was difficult to get the Wi-Fi bandwidth that we needed. And I wasn't going to just be doing one where I was constantly buffering. And I was out doing so much reporting and experiencing life, which, my life tends to revolve around these live streams otherwise. So I just allowed that to happen. And, I'll have a lot to report back on, not just throughout this stream, but throughout the rest of the coming months, because I gained so much insight into not just the negotiations taking place between the US and Iran indirectly, but also just Iranian society, the broader outlines of Iranian society, and why some of their negotiating positions are, why they have certain red lines, where they're more flexible. So I think it was a really beneficial trip for me. We'll talk about that during this stream, but I think we should catch up on news around Gaza to start out. And I'm here with Aaron Mate, as always. Aaron, where in the world are you?
I'm in London right now at the end of a trip. I was in Turkey or Turkey, and then I went to Oslo for an event there and met. And then I've been in London. I did an event here as well and met some wonderful people and a lot of Grayzone fans everywhere. And it's great to be back here with you, Max, doing this. It's been at least a month since we did our last one. So we're long overdue. And because it's been so long, we decided to be on time today, everybody. But don't get used to that.
Yeah, that was a real calculated decision. But I actually I couldn't wait. So was there anything before we get started, anything you did in those Western European locations that we should all be afraid to enter?
Well, one thing I noticed speaking in the UK, I spoke at a conference called a festival called How the Light Gets In, and got to meet Jeremy Corbyn for the first time. That was a thrill for me, and his wife Laura and Yanis Varoufakis was there too. But one thing I noticed, I gave a talk about Russia, Ukraine, Russia Gate, and it was really well attended. But one thing I noticed from the questions is, at least if the questions are a sample representation of the feeling here, just there's a real strong, just complete, in my opinion, just delusion about Russia. This belief that they want to reconstitute the Soviet Union and they're a threat to everybody. And I got some hostile reactions to what I was saying, and I just thought that was interesting. And it strikes me, it's something about the UK I've never quite understood. Is like it seems to me that the level of sort of paranoia about Russia seems to be more than in other societies, and it's something I've never fully understood. But I got a little bit of a taste of it just talking to people at my talk, and it was interesting. But there was a dialogue, and hopefully some people heard what I had to say with an open mind.
It is that way in the UK. It also depends on what circles you're in. If you're on the left, I mean, it sounds like a more social democratic crowd, more EU centric crowd. But there is a hysteria in the UK that we talked about here a lot, and that Kit Clarenberg speaks to a lot in the UK, that I think goes back to British Empire, that you won't get elsewhere. So that's pretty interesting. You talk about Palestine and Western Europe, and there's a pretty broad consensus on the left that what's happening there is a genocide, free Palestine. So that's cool that you were actually doing something subversive within left circles.
I mean, I made sure, of course, at the beginning of all my events to talk about Palestine, because it is the moral issue of our time, the Holocaust of our time. But yeah, I mean, there is still a proxy war in Ukraine going on, and I am writing a book about it, which comes out this year. So, yeah. But listen, it's been great to be on the road and great to meet so many people who appreciate Grayzone everywhere. And now it's great to be back doing our regular live streams.
Yeah. So yeah, we're back in action. Someone asked me what my favorite Iranian dish was, and lot to choose from. The most interesting one was one whose name I forget, in Isfahan, which is a yellow kind of sweet custard. And I was quizzed on what I thought the main ingredient was, and didn't realize that the main ingredient that holds it all together is lamb neck. So definitely the most unexpected dessert custard I've ever had, made of lamb neck. Iranian food is really hearty, and it's not like I haven't had it before, but having it constantly really reinforces the point that it's it captures the culture. It captures the continuous civilization of Iran really well. And it's usually really consistent. Like no matter where you go, it's usually pretty good. So we'll get into that. I think, today is a significant day in Gaza, in the besieged Gaza Strip. There have been 11 weeks of blockade of food, which has brought conditions to famine levels in certain areas of Gaza. Israel has been, in addition to assassinating Hamas personnel to prevent the adequate distribution of aid through traditional UN lines, what they've been doing is emboldening gangs, including figures connected to ISIS smuggling networks in the Sinai Peninsula, to steal the aid and then sell it at inflated prices. And by creating the crisis, they create the impetus for completely changing aid distribution. Now, the US could easily have stepped in, the Trump administration, and said, we're going to suspend arms shipments and until you enact a ceasefire and you open up all distribution points. But they didn't do that. Instead, this network of shady NGOs and fake charities was set up to completely subvert the UN system, to take the United Nations, UNRWA, out of Gaza. And this is all part of regime change in Gaza, and ultimately part of occupation and ethnic cleansing. And we'll get into the details here. But today was the day when this new aid system was supposed to be implemented. It's been a complete failure, a complete catastrophe, leading to stampedes, concentration camp scenes where people from Gaza have been, there you go. I mean, that was the featured image on this stream. And this is how people in Gaza are supposed to get their food now. They have to march across kilometers and kilometers of an active war zone, where they could easily be targeted by drones, quadricopters, snipers, and then get to this point where they're put in cattle pens, and then they wait there as American mercenaries doing static protection, allow them to get like a box of food. And they're all doing this on behalf of Israel. So it led to catastrophe and chaos. But how did we get here? I think that's what we need to address, since we haven't done a stream in like a month. And Aaron, what's your sense of how it got to this point? Because honestly, I mean, you would have thought that the genocide would have been wrapped up by now. Even Trump said there's nothing else for Israel to gain. They're just wasting time.
Yeah, and he also said a lot of people are starving and suffering. We're going to do something about it. But so far, what Trump has done is continue to give Israel the green light. And we thought maybe there was a breakthrough a few weeks ago when the U.S. bypassed Israel, at least as far as we could tell, and directly negotiated with Hamas to free Israeli-American soldier, IDF soldier, Edan Alexander. And there was an agreement there made between Hamas and Steve Witkoff, in which Edan Alexander would be freed, and Hamas got nothing officially in return. Like nothing was announced, but what emerged later, Hamas officials said, was that Witkoff told them that if they can free Edan Alexander, then Trump will basically end the blockade, and Trump will push for permanent ceasefire talks. And by all appearances, the Trump administration reneged on that, gave Hamas absolutely nothing. So it looks like the Trump administration, if Hamas's claims are correct, completely played Hamas. And so and then it makes you think, so like this was, happen as this was happening, like the media was getting all these reports fed from the White House, people around the White House. There's a big rift between Trump and Netanyahu, and that Trump is defying Netanyahu. And now, especially in retrospect, that looks like a giant con, that there is no rift between Trump and Netanyahu, at least on Gaza, maybe on the Iran talks, but at least on Gaza, because when it came to freeing Edan Alexander, Hamas got absolutely nothing in return. And Witkoff betrayed his promise.
Yeah. And I guess the report was from Drop Site. Jeremy Scahill's, got Osama Hamdan and Bassem Naim on the line consistently. And those are like the two front-facing figures from Hamas that speak to English language media. If, we've interviewed them. I interviewed Osama Hamdan in Istanbul. You've interviewed Bassem Naim. And they're like spokesmen. And if you ask them political questions or say, do you think October 7th was wise, blah, 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 they're going to give you spin like any spokesman. But if you ask them for details about the negotiations, they pretty much have to tell the truth. And they've been telling the truth over and over, unlike the Israelis. So I think it's a credible report by Jeremy Scahill at Drop Site, and the Western media is not really giving them a voice. And and what they show time and time again is that they accept a U.S. proposal, then the Israelis reject the proposal, and then someone like Steve Witkoff will come back and say Hamas is making unacceptable demands, and he will completely renege on the proposal he put forward in order to accommodate Israeli demands. And yeah, there were some kind of war of words or tension between Trump and the Israelis when Trump went to Riyadh and all the Gulf states. He bypassed Israel. Pete Hegseth actually canceled a trip to Israel. We don't know why. Netanyahu was angry and the Israelis were angry that Trump accepted a ceasefire with Ansar Allah in Yemen, called them brave, but did not demand that they stop launching missiles toward Israel. But ultimately, like the trip to the Gulf amounted to nothing but kind of transactional payoffs to Trump, bribery in broad daylight, but there was no real geopolitical agenda that we could deduce from that trip that drew any daylight between Trump and Israel.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. And this comes after Israel did sabotage the first round of direct U.S.-Hamas talks back in March, when Adam Boehler, who was Trump's hostage envoy, he had direct talks with Hamas officials. And that's when he, notably came out on CNN and said that the U.S. is not an agent of Israel and we can make our own decisions. And he even said the Hamas guys were nice guys and he liked talking to them. And they, Adam Boehler talked about, their discussions were not just about freeing Edan Alexander, but also a long-term truce. And he said, we have a real possibility of having a long-term ceasefire for over many years. And that's when he got pulled from the scene because Israel complained, and Israel, put out some strategically timed leaks to undermine Adam Boehler. But these talks again, so what freed Edan Alexander was a more recent round of talks, which was successful. But it strikes me as if the U.S. and Israel had some sort of understanding that basically whatever the U.S. would agree to, they wouldn't follow through on, because they didn't, and the genocide continues.
So it was like a gentleman's agreement that should have been put in writing that the U.S. would force Israel to end the siege of Gaza, allow humanitarian aid in, and enact a fairly long temporary ceasefire that was going to lead to a permanent ceasefire. And yeah, Witkoff totally reneged. And one of the pieces of evidence that I would point to is that Witkoff's son, Alex Witkoff, retweeted this tweet by Jason Meister. President Trump and Steve Witkoff saved Edan Alexander's life. No pallets of cash, no prisoner swaps, and no terrorists released. Every single American, regardless of political affiliation, should be proud of this historic moment. So basically, they didn't give Hamas anything in exchange, and they're bragging about it. And his son is boasting about this through retweet. I mean, the retweet was clearly an endorsement. And that is just horrendous diplomacy that echoed or resonated very negatively in Iran, where I was at the time, speaking to Iranian negotiators. They saw this as evidence of the bad faith of the U.S. and that the U.S. is not trustworthy. And so what did Israel proceed to do after getting Edan Alexander? Slaughter hundreds and hundreds of civilians. And I mean, we could show you images of charred children, doctor coming to work at the hospital and finding 8 of her 9 children slaughtered. I mean,
9 out of 10.
9 out of 10. Sorry, girl seeking to escape her burning home as her family burns to death and barely escaping with wounds all over her body. I mean, the unspeakable horrors continue to pour out of Gaza, and it's all thanks to this horrendous U.S. diplomacy where Steve Witkoff, real estate lawyer, has turned into the latest Jewish American diplomat to serve as Israel's lawyer. And here we are today. And by the way, I mean, what the hell is going on in Edan Alexander's hometown? And what the hell was he doing there in the first place? He wasn't just some hostage. He was a prisoner of war who was an American, Jewish American, who was propagandized by Zionism and decided to fight for a foreign apartheid occupation army. There's not any reason to celebrate this figure. He was enforcing siege and serving basically as a concentration camp guard inside a tank inside Gaza on October 7th. It wasn't like he was just some innocent Jewish victim of anti-Semitism. And this is what was going on in Tenafly, New Jersey upon his release. Look at this. There's like hardly any even American flags there. And like Trumpers, they freak out anytime they see some like Mexicans waving a Mexican flag in areas that used to be Mexico. But then this is like what they celebrate. An entire community that's been propagandized into believing that they deserve a second country on the back of millions of indigenous people.
And again, how did Edan Alexander look compared to all the Palestinian hostages who come out of Israeli torture dungeons? I mean, again, Hamas treats Israeli captives infinitely better than Israel treats. Like, you can't even compare it. I mean, you look at Palestinian prisoners, if they make it out alive. I mean, so many haven't. So many have been murdered, including that prominent doctor a few months ago. But, the Palestinian prisoners who come out of Israeli prisons and dungeons, they're emaciated. They've been tortured. They've been seriously abused. Edan Alexander looked pretty good considering what he's been through.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone is coming out of Gaza with they've lost weight, it's because everybody's lost weight in Gaza. It's because the caloric intake is plummeted across the Gaza Strip, and they're subjected to the same conditions as everyone else, as well as Israeli airstrikes that have killed dozens of captives in Gaza, including Edan Alexander was almost killed on, I believe it was March 15th or April 15th, when Hamas lost contact with the team that was guarding him, and he turned up alive. But there was this sense that Netanyahu wanted him dead, which is why Edan Alexander did not meet with Netanyahu and held a sign just thanking Donald Trump, because the U.S. engaged in direct negotiations with Hamas and had to circumvent Israel because Israel does not want to end this genocide. And with the reneging on the deal to allow humanitarian aid in and have a temporary ceasefire after Edan Alexander's release, Israel embarked on an apocalyptic final solution operation in Gaza. And they believe that this will lead to total victory. And what does total victory mean? Total victory means 75% of Gaza will be immediately occupied. It's the Wall Street Journal on Israel's plan for Gaza. Israel aims to control 75% of Gaza in 2 months, military says. And that's part of what the aid distribution plan is about, because they're going to put the aid distribution points mainly in the areas where they want to concentrate the population, keeping them out of central and northern Gaza. They're going to concentrate them all around Rafah. And then from there, they're going to start trying to push them out into Egypt.
Yeah.
Netanyahu even said as much. He's making it seem like, oh, the world and all these acts of God have forced Gaza to be blocked off. But we think that, people should be free to leave. They shouldn't be held in prison, because the plan is ethnic cleansing.
Which is how all this began in 1948, with ethnic cleansing, and Israel just trying to finish the job. And in many of the same ways that they did in 1948, with mass terror and taking advantage of the opportunity that they feel they have right now for a final solution. That's why, today, this incident today at the so-called aid distribution center was in the South. And what are they trying to do there? It seems as if, like now in the Western media, it's reported there was chaos and U.S.-Israeli contractors lost control. But this seems like this was deliberate. They want a crisis. They want an excuse to pen people, cage them, and then kick them out. And just to bring this up just so we can recap all the, some of the most important developments. Then a few days ago, it was reported there was another agreement between Hamas and Witkoff, which is the second time in recent memory that this has happened. And immediately, once Israel got word of it, they rejected it, they denounced it, sabotaged it. And once again, as you said earlier, Witkoff came out and said Hamas is making unacceptable demands, which he never ever specifies. He never said what's unacceptable.
We don't know.
So he said this now. This is the second time he's done this. I recall him saying this. I've lost track now when it was, maybe a month ago. That but he only says this after Israel objects to a ceasefire framework that he himself brokers. So every single time Israel has objected, Witkoff has fallen in line.
Every single time. Unacceptable. Disappointing and completely unacceptable, according to Witkoff. And it was the proposal was for a 60-day ceasefire with the release of 5 live hostages on the first day and another 5 living hostages on its last day. And it would have increased humanitarian aid to Gaza, forced the withdrawal of Israeli troops to the lines they were in last March, and will have forced Israel to negotiate and not unilaterally resume the war. So those are the points that Israel objected to, obviously, because look at their conduct today. And Witkoff just said, okay, well, and it's not just Witkoff, it's Miriam Adelson. It's the entire network, the preponderance of Zionist power on the Trump administration that is brought to bear in order to compel total unanimity between Trump and Israel on every negotiating point, which is why the slaughter continues. And we just have no idea when it's going to end. The Europeans obviously sense that the U.S. can't be taken seriously to end this war. And, even Germany, one of the biggest sponsors of the Gaza Holocaust, the second largest sponsor of the Gaza Holocaust next to the U.S., is speaking up for the first time. Here's Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
Das, was die israelische Armee
The Israeli
jetzt im
army is now
Gazastreifen
doing in the
macht.
Gaza Strip.
Ich verstehe offen gestanden nicht mehr, mit welchem Ziel. Die Zivilbevölkerung derart in Mitleidenschaft zu nehmen, wie das in den letzten Tagen
Has increasingly been the case in recent days, can no longer be justified as a fight against Hamas terrorism. And, he was met with Israeli Holocaust guilt, of course. But this is really like the Europeans seeking to assert some sort of leverage, because Trump has just shown that he will do nothing to twist Israel's arm, even after Trump himself acknowledged there's nothing strategically for Israel to gain at this point.
So what finally broke the dam for Germany? It's that Israel imposed the starvation siege and openly bragged about it. And I guess finally for some allies, that was just a bridge too far. That it's okay to commit mass murder for a year and a half against a defenseless death camp, but like imposing a more than 80-day starvation siege and openly bragging about it and just mocking everyone who's objecting to it. I guess finally that's what did it. That's what compelled Germany and Canada and the UK to and France to speak out.
Yeah, they spoke up. What have they done? I mean, what Germany has actual leverage. It supplies Israel with 48% of its weapons, and it's not suspending any arms. The UK has issued some sort of individual sanctions on fanatical settlers,
which is such a convenient foil. You just like you pretend as if the problem is some random extremists in the West Bank, not the people in charge of the government across the political spectrum. So the settlers actually serve that purpose. And also they said they're going to suspend talks in a new trade deal with Israel. Yeah, okay. But while still, as Matt Kennard, a British journalist, has pointed out tirelessly, still supplying intelligence to Israel to carry out mass murder and weaponry.
Yeah. So it is lip service, too little, too late. The slaughter continues. And Donald Trump continues to pay lip service. I mean, he said that, he wants to wrap up the war. But I saw Alex Jones today, one of Trump's, the biggest pro-Trump propagandist in the media, claiming that Trump is surrounded by figures who won't let him enact his real agenda. And not relating to Israel-Palestine, but it's kind of like maybe that's the case. So Trump didn't defeat the deep state. He's doing this. He's pretty much like playing the role that Biden played, a doddering old man who's lost control of any agenda and is, being puppeteered by figures who have their own ulterior militaristic, globalist agenda.
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of Trump fans have been saying this from the start that he's being subverted by his own team and okay, well, at a certain point, maybe it's time to think that like this is Trump's agenda, and he doesn't really have all the things he talks about. Stopping endless wars, America first. I mean, it's great marketing, and he has a big following and a big supportive fan base because of it. But what does he actually do toward that goal? Nothing. And if it's not obvious by now, I mean, maybe it will be by the end of his first term. Second term.
Second term.
Yeah, second term. Exactly.
It's like it often feels like the third coming of Bush's second term.
Yeah.
Or the third coming of Biden's first term felt like the second coming of Bush's second term.
100%.
No, sorry. Bush's first term was actually worse than the second term, but you know what I'm saying. The neocons, there's this neocon osmosis. So I want to get back to the Gaza aid fiasco. Today, thousands of Gaza residents stormed this dystopian Israeli-American aid complex in Western Rafah. The temperature is boiling. They're being forced to stand in long lines under hot sun in a fence camp. There's biometric surveillance in order to get them in. This is all the product of Israeli plan to subvert UNRWA and the United Nations aid distribution complex, which has effectively supplied the people of Gaza with everything they've needed, including first-class free schooling since 1950. And this is what it looks like under the watch of this so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which we'll explain to you. And it's chaos. People are now fleeing live fire after a stampede predictably ensued. That's a concentration camp, everybody. And this is a Holocaust.
I'm just going to
And
mute.
this concentration camp is being guarded by American or maintained by American mercenaries on behalf of an apartheid state called Israel. Here's what they get. You can see, I'll go back really quickly. You can see right here at the bottom of your screen, you can see GHF. That's the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is overseeing all this, but no one really knows what the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is. And it is connected to two firms, one called Safe Reach Solutions, and another that I think is called UC Global, which are hiring American mercenaries for this task. And here's a look at one of the mercenaries on the scene who was hired by one of these firms operating under the GHF auspices. And he's kind of just like mocking thousands and thousands of desperate war refugees inside a concentration camp today in Western Rafah. And they've been lured there with the promise of food, and they will be kept there to prevent them from returning home. So Israel can occupy the Gaza Strip, presumably steal their land.
For people just listening, he's giving the heart sign to the crowd and also the aloha hand gesture. So yeah, he's mocking them, or maybe he thinks he's some noble humanitarian, as thousands of starving people wait for like a pittance of food from his scam organization, which ultimately traces back to Israel. It's basically an Israeli front group at the behest of, with the involvement of the U.S. government to, as you said, replace the existing humanitarian mechanism that is already in Gaza, UNRWA.
Yeah, so let's kind of get into what this organization is. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was spun out of the Maritime Foundation that maintained or conceived the Gaza Aid Pier back in 2024. Remember the Gaza Aid Pier that the U.S. government paid $325 million for, U.S. taxpayer money. A pier was placed by U.S. naval engineers or U.S. Army engineers off the Gaza shore, and it floated away into the sea. Almost nothing came into the Gaza Strip through that pier. The pier was ultimately used for the blood-soaked operation the Israeli army enacted to rescue Noam Argamani, the Nova Electronic Music Festival captive, and 3 others, during which they slaughtered over 250 people at a market, an open-air market in, I believe, Deir al-Balah, after their special forces team, which was operating undercover, posing as a Gaza aid convoy, one of the few convoys that came in through the pier, was exposed. And so the Gaza Aid Pier was then used to spirit out the so-called hostages, one of whom appeared with Netanyahu in Congress. And 250 people were murdered, bombed, slaughtered, shot at point blank range. That was the Aid Pier. And then all these organizations that were behind that were spun out into something else called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation through an Israeli initiative, which was exposed in the Washington Post. But it had been reported on by other outlets. We'd even done some reporting at the Grayzone, republishing reporter Jack Paulson on how Safe Reach Solutions was actually operating out of a generational wealth management office by people with no experience in humanitarian aid. The Washington Post is one of many publications that corroborated that reporting and showed that the Israelis were actually behind this. it starts out with last year, a group of former U.S. intelligence and defense officials and business executives working in close consultation with Israel prepared a proposal for supplying aid to Gaza that would address Israeli government claims that assistance was being diverted by Hamas. The UN, if you talk to them, will state clearly Hamas was not diverting any aid. The problem was that Hamas was protecting the aid, and they didn't want the aid reaching the population because they want to control aid as a means of preventing Hamas from reconstituting and to starve the population into submission to Israeli objectives, basically to get their captives out without having to give Hamas anything like a relaxation of the siege or more prisoners out. The group detailed a radically new and ambitious model, the creation of an organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that would hire armed private contractors to provide logistics and security for a handful of aid distribution hubs to be built in southern Gaza. So all the horrors you saw today, these are the blueprints. Palestinians would have to travel to the hubs and submit to identity checks to receive rations from NGOs. They would live eventually, the Palestinians, in guarded compounds, concentration camps, in other words, that would each house up to tens of thousands of non-combatants. But the planners started to anticipate potentially damaging questions from the public about the opaque origin of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, lack of qualifications of its leadership, and moral legitimacy, because all it's doing is providing humanitarian cover to a Holocaust. And the Washington Post reports it's scheduled to launch Monday. They're not sure how it's going to succeed. And then they go over some internal documents as well as interviews with GHF executives and advisors and Israeli officials, people familiar with the foundation, who outline significant hurdles that they're planning to face, and provided a 198-page confidential document showing that the GHF has no past projects or performance to fall on. They need international aid groups with credibility, but don't have any. The UN is not cooperating. There's confusion, doubt about who will even lead the organization, public skepticism. And then here's the best part, most revealing part. The GHF is likely to encounter allegations likening its food distribution hubs and residential compounds with, quote, concentration camps with biometrics, or comparing the organization with Blackwater, former U.S. mercenary firm implicated in violence against civilians in Iraq, whose founder, Eric Prince, by the way, is very close to the Trump administration, as well as to Mohammed bin Zayed, the Emirati crown prince, who is also close to the Trump administration. Prince lives in the UAE, and the UAE was supposed to put up money for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, but it's not clear where the money's coming from. Even the Israeli army has questioned this plan and said that long queues at GHF hubs would lead to stampedes. Well, that's what we saw today, but they still went ahead with it. And then it says that GHF has secured $100 million from an undisclosed donor. Who is it? Why don't we know who that donor is? So the whole thing is shady. And then after that article drops, the whole thing collapsed. It just collapsed overnight. This is another Washington Post article. Late Sunday, Jake Wood, the head of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, resigned, saying the group's plans could not be consistent with what he called the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. And the chief operating officer, David Burke, also resigned. And the Swiss, this isn't reported here, but Ynet, the Israeli broadsheet, reported today that the Swiss government is now investigating GHF, criminal investigation. It is no longer active, what was registered in Switzerland, and now it's operating as the GHF, but through some kind of US entity. And keep in mind, all of this has been approved by the Trump administration, Christian Zionist fanatic, US Israeli reciprocal ambassador Mike Huckabee personally approved this in March, and the impetus came from Israel. And I think, Aaron, that everyone's resigning because they can see the writing on the wall. I mean, these are rats fleeing a sinking ship for sure, but they don't want to take responsibility for the disaster that was about to ensue. And they don't want to be complicit in a gigantic war crime, but they took it this far. I mean, up until last week, Jake Wood was doing interviews with all the cable news networks about what's happening.
Well, exactly. What does it tell you that someone like Jake Wood, who's a Marine veteran, war profiteer, whose own planning documents, as you quoted, talked about concerns from the public that this would be a concentration camp with biometrics. They were willing to take part in this up until it was about to launch, and they felt compelled to resign. It tells you that they just, like, the scale of evil and criminality here is just so extreme that even someone who's willing to profit off of that realized that it would be against their own self-interest to take part in it, so they couldn't go ahead with it. I mean, that's unprecedented to me. I've never seen a high-level resignation of a foundation like that. Well, first of all, I've never heard of a dystopian scheme like this before. It's sort of head-spinning. But even before it launches, they can't go ahead with it because they realize it's just the criminality and the evil is just too much to conceal. And just to stress what you said earlier, it's in the South for a reason. These so-called aid centers are in the South because they want to push everybody in Gaza to there, so they can also ultimately facilitate ethnic cleansing. First, you imprison them. First, you kidnap people, as reportedly has happened, actually, with people showing up have reportedly been detained in some cases, and many people are now sleeping there because they're hoping, desperate, that because they have no other choice for aid. So people are sleeping there overnight in the hopes that tomorrow they'll get something when it opens up again. Completely dystopian. Even some of the profiteers, the top profiteers involved, couldn't even go ahead with it.
Yeah, we'll get into some of those figures a little in a second. But I just wanted to note that one of the organizations, which is a mercenary firm associated with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, is still hiring right now. This is from UG Solutions, which is headed by a former CIA officer, like a 45-year veteran of the CIA. And yeah, I think he's on the board of GHF. And they're looking for senior paramilitary operators. They don't say where they're going to operate, but they say that as of May 20th, they have to be able to deploy within 2 weeks. They're looking for snipers, unconventional warfare specialists, special forces personnel, and intelligence. And these are people who are going to be potentially killing residents of the Gaza Strip, Holocaust refugees in the Gaza Strip, who are Americans. And so how is this not putting a target on the US's back? I mean, you're just seeing so much more visibility of US former military personnel in Gaza in the context of the Holocaust of our time. How is this not actually imperiling US national security? I don't see how it's adding to US national security. It seems like the Israelis are using these sociopathic American mercs to try to draw some distance between themselves and what was a doomed aid boondoggle. And, the leadership is all fleeing, but you have all these figures, they're like suburban dad, former Iraq war criminals who are like 45 years old, who are effectively occupying the southern Gaza Strip. And by the way, it would be a shame if people started flooding these application forms with fake applications. We would hate to see that happen.
I recall, Max, when Biden unveiled his fake so-called aid pier, which again was just a cover for Israel to continue blocking aid into Gaza, and possibly a front for other operations like the massacre of over 200 Palestinians during a captive rescue mission. I recall you warning at the beginning on one of these streams that this was going to put U.S. troops also in harm's way, the aid pier off of Gaza. And just recently, a Pentagon report revealed that the number of soldiers, U.S. soldiers injured in that was a lot higher than disclosed. 62 troops, not 3, were hurt during the operation of the Gaza aid pier, including a soldier who's basically, who was, I believe, fatally wounded. At least one. So, and of course, this disclosure comes way after the fact. And this operation now, similar playbook, fake aid operation to perpetuate ethnic cleansing. And on top of all the Palestinians that it will newly endanger, it also is dangerous for the contractors as well. But I'm sure they'll be paid very handsomely for their services.
Yeah, I mean, those were like enlisted soldiers. A lot of them, they were soldiers who probably joined because they, wanted to pay for college or something like that. Active duty soldiers, Christian soldiers enlisted to fight for and support the Judeo-fascist state. They didn't have a choice. These guys, these are mercenaries. They're doing it for money. I have no sympathy for them at all. But they should be told. And if I met any of them, I would tell them to their face, they are actually harming U.S. national security. They are putting all American citizens at risk with what they're doing. They are placing a target on the back of all Americans, and they're doing it for the money. And the scum who run this are just war criminals of the worst variety. And some of them have reputations as sort of heroic figures in the field of international aid, and they're trying to hide what they're doing. One figure who's been involved in all of this and is just revered, and he owns like every restaurant in Washington, D.C., and he's revered as this hero who feeds people. He just loves to feed people, and he's this gregarious Spanish cook who's actually just a front man for U.S. soft power and U.S. empire. Actually was a culinary ambassador for the State Department under Tony Blinken, is good friends with Tony Blinken, is Chef Jose Andres, who has blocked me. He was heavily involved in shilling for the proxy war in Ukraine. And now he's actually condemning the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, showing some of the stampedes. Here's Jose Andres declaring GHF has left Palestinians without food. The people that created it are selfish. And now, because people are really hungry, just stormed the distribution place, damaging the fence. It seems a helicopter began shooting. World Central Kitchen, which is his international charity, the system of kitchens is the way, Palestinians feeding Palestinians. Well, that's actually not the way. World Central Kitchen entered the Gaza Strip in early 2024 as part of the plan to subvert the way, which is the traditional UNRWA system, the United Nations system, or the real way would be to allow them to have an actual government and state, but that can't happen. And Jose Andres started actually creating his own pier using the rubble of homes that were destroyed in the Gaza Strip. We did an article criticizing this. I mean, these are homes of people who weren't able to even go back and find their belongings. It was taken without their permission. There could have been dead bodies in the homes. And then his own workers were killed deliberately by the Israeli army in a drone strike, a double tap drone strike against their convoy, which was marked and had coordinated with the Israeli military, because Jose Andres, the hero, was willing to coordinate with a genocidal military. They killed him anyway. And then he pulled out, and Jose Andres, he still maintained his friendships with the Biden administration, sending the Hellfire missiles to Israel that killed his staff. So this is a really craven, avaricious, phony individual who is now trying to, criticize the program that he helped legitimize. But it gets even worse than this. And I mean, the scandal goes so deep into the international aid world. The legend of Jose Andres was really created through a documentary produced by Ron Howard formerly known as Opie from Mayberry, who became a famous Hollywood director, Oscar-winning director. And the documentary was produced by someone named Nate Mook. Nate Mook was actually the CEO, I think, of World Central Kitchen at the time. So it's basically a naked propaganda vehicle for World Central Kitchen. It featured talking heads who were actually paid lobbyists for World Central Kitchen, pretending they were just journalists, just shameless propaganda. Jose Andres appears in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, feeding people with these kitchens and as if they can't feed themselves in Puerto Rico. And then he goes to Ukraine and he's hanging out with Zelensky and he's a hero there. Nate Mook then leaves World Central Kitchen under a storm of controversy, the shadow of controversy, because we don't totally know what the controversy is. Something about covering up sexual harassment, blah, blah, blah. But he leaves and he has just resurfaced at the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So Jose Andres' guy has just resurfaced apparently as the founder of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in Switzerland. But Nate Mook is refusing to speak to the press. Uri Blau is an Israeli reporter who's been trying to speak to him, refuses to speak to him, claims he was never on the board of GHF. But these are founding documents from the Swiss government showing that Nate Mook, Jose Andres' longtime executive, was a founder of this group. So basically, this Holocaust has implicated the entire aid apparatus of Western Empire. I mean, this is the cream of the crop. These are the top figures.
It's such a creepy that whole fake NGO world is such a creepy scene. Like,
yep,
so cynical, posing as humanitarians to advance hegemonic ends, and it's so many of the same people. They're always jumping to new positions and new boards, and there's so much overlap. So good digging here. He's a special advisor on Ukraine at the McCain Global Leaders Advisory Council. Okay,
and
and that's the
for the Howard Buffett Foundation, he's a special advisor. So that's Warren Buffett's son.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Howard Buffett was the donor, the $100 million donor.
And again, all this is what? It's just to replace UNRWA, which is in that campaign. This is basically all continuing the Biden policy. Like, Trump is the one difference with Biden is there wasn't a starvation siege as extensive as the one now currently under Trump and Netanyahu. But aside from that, it's all the Biden policy. Biden also helped the Israeli campaign against UNRWA. Biden promoted all the allegations that UNRWA was implicated in October 7th. Completely ridiculous. And they want to replace UNRWA because UNRWA kept Palestinians alive and also kept Palestinian culture alive. Like, in UNRWA schools, Palestinian students learn about their culture and they learn about why they should be proud of their culture. And you notice, how many Palestinians you see, on Gaza, to the extent they're allowed on television, speak, really good English. That's in part because of UNRWA, because the education system is so good and the people of Gaza have so much pride in their education system. And that's why they're in the crosshairs of Israel and the US, because this is about genocide. This is about wiping out a people, and not just their ethnic cleansing, but also taking away their hospitals and their education system.
UNRWA is the United Nations Refugee Works Agency. And once you destroy UNRWA, you declassify Palestinians as refugees, which is the goal of Zionism, is to say they're no longer refugees. They're just Arabs who are just there, who can be swept away with the wind into any other Arab country. And it's one of the main Zionist talking points I've always heard throughout my life is, why don't the Arabs just take them? Why don't the Arabs just take them? So that's what this is about. And not letting UNRWA back in requires replacing it with something for now. And this is that something, and we still don't know exactly what it is or who's behind it. The leadership is mostly resigned. Here's Avigdor Lieberman, who is now an Israeli opposition figure, was former deputy prime minister, extremely right-wing leader of kind of the Russian Jewish community in Israel's Likudnik world. he is saying that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, well, this is his exact quote: "The money for humanitarian aid comes from the Mossad and the Ministry of Defense." And he's complaining that Israelis shouldn't pay to feed people in Gaza. But
he's complaining that the Israeli front group is too expensive. The Israeli front group used to advance ethnic cleansing, to pretend to be a humanitarian, is too expensive. It's costing Israeli citizens too much because of the meager amounts of so-called aid that they're handing out to people.
Yeah, but he's in the Knesset. He has access to financial information, and he's in, a power player in Israel. So he let the cat out of the bag. What he's saying is the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has American faces. It's now like the interim director is a former USAID administrator named John Ackery, and it's a front for the Mossad. So, I mean, the Mossad is behind this whole thing, is what he's saying. There's $100 million from a mysterious donor. The donor could be the Mossad, or I know how the Mossad works. They'll tell some venture capitalist or hedge fund guy who's sympathetic to Israel on Wall Street, like, hey, can you just kick us down this money and we'll pay you back later because we need it now. Send it to this shell company. So it could be a Mossad cutout that's paying for this, but it's Israeli through and through, and the US and its mercenaries are fronting for Israel and putting targets on their backs. I don't think the scandal could be adequately captured in one live stream, but this has to be one of the biggest aid scandals in history. Like, the last one I can think of that's anywhere close to this would be after the earthquake in Haiti, like what the Clinton Foundation went and did, and all these other, then Red Cross, where like they just took hundreds of millions of dollars and left with like 5 houses built. And it's the Trump era. The mask is off. It's just another giant mask off moment. All these people need to be jailed. They're like, they're scamming someone. They're stealing money from someone. We don't even know who, in order to legitimize a Holocaust.
At the behest of a foreign government, acting as a front for a foreign apartheid state. I mean, talk about all the fear-mongering about foreign interference, and the whole thing with Russiagate was like Russia's taking over the U.S. They're controlling our president, and this is actual foreign interference. This actually is foreign control, and it's acting as an agent of the Israeli government to carry out, as you said, a Holocaust. Look at those images. I mean, what do these images remind us of? People penned in cages, desperate for the meager amount of food rations that they get every single day. I mean, the parallels to the Nazi genocide are constant. I'm not sure if we mentioned, but one of the latest atrocities the other day was Israel bombing a shelter, a school shelter, where dozens of civilians, I think killing 36 people just with one bombing. That was the other night. It's impossible to keep track of all the atrocities because they just pile up every single day.
And Western media doesn't report it anymore. Like, I was off Twitter for a while because I was in transit. If you got to like log out of everything now if you're going through like US customs. And so I just missed out on a lot of it, but I was still able to, like, while in hotels or like on a flight, I was able to watch CNN and see what mainstream US media was reporting. And it's just not even there. It's not even there at all. You have to be on social media to even know what's going on during the Holocaust of our time. And the images are just so hideous. They just get worse and worse and worse. It's just unfathomable.
Well, the images that everybody should have seen were the images of the 9 charred children, the 9 children of the doctor who were burned alive by Israel. If that was any other conflict, certainly a conflict that the U.S. was on the other side of, those images would have been everywhere. And then the image of the young girl, her home in flames, trying to like escape the fire, and she suffered she survived thankfully. Her whole family was killed. That image of that little girl in the flame should have been everywhere, but it wasn't. I mean, you saw it on social media if you went there, but otherwise, that was kept off the front pages.
Something that also happened the past week was one of my favorite filmmakers, or a filmmaker who inspired one of the filmmakers I find to be one of the biggest inspirations, died at age 89. His name was Marcel Ofoul. He was French Jewish filmmaker. His family fled the Nazis and wound up in Hollywood. His father was a filmmaker as well. He made one film called Hotel Terminus about Klaus Barbie, who was a Nazi torturer who was then hired by the CIA and used in Operation Condor throughout South America, working for the Bolivian fascist regime, Chile, Paraguay, to torture communists. He had honed his skills torturing communists in Europe. And Ofoul followed him all around South America, trying to basically hunt him down for an interview. It's a 5-hour-long documentary, but it's just like for 5 hours, you have to sit with the fact that the U.S. rehabilitated Nazi torturers. And his most famous film is The Sorrow and the Pity, which is about the French resistance in World War II. And we would always hear about how the French valiantly fought under de Gaulle and fought the Nazis and had this brilliant guerrilla resistance. And what Ofoul illustrated through his film was that the French actually were pretty content in many places, especially at the elite level with Nazi occupation. French resistance fighters were isolated. They were pariahs in many cases. They were hated. They were considered a nuisance. They were not supported broadly by French society. And French society, because of its hatred of communism or hatred of Jews, would just participate in Vichy occupation. And the film never made it to the French theaters, the famous theaters in Paris. It was basically soft banned. There were just a few small houses that would show it. There was fierce backlash for Ofoul, and the film became famous over the next decades in the United States, because we're not French. But I mean, I think about the people protesting Gaza now, or the actionists in the UK, the Filton 18 with Palestine Action, who are still in jail, all of the journalists who've been detained, Asa Winstanley, Richard Medhurst, people who are being deported in the US under orders of Zionist fanatic organizations, the demonization of protesters on campuses, and the generally apathetic attitude of most Americans to the Holocaust of our time, and especially the role of the Western corporate media in drumming up support and manufacturing support for this genocide with all the lies early on. And now they're doing a form of manufacturing support through omission, just not showing charred babies. This is the same thing morally to me. They're Nazi collaborators at the elite level. And our government, of course, it's not just Randy Fine, this disgusting ogre figure who's paid by AIPAC in Congress to call for nuking Gaza, but all the members of Congress who just go along and quietly vote for the appropriations to send weapons to Israel. The U.S. has just sent hundreds of tons of weapons to Israel. This is Nazi collaboration in modern form, and most people aren't talking about it. We are fairly isolated, but at the same time, the tide is turning in public opinion. Most Americans under 35, vast majority, are just not on board with this, but there's nowhere for them to go, and there's no leadership to mobilize them. So, we're in the woods, we're in the wilderness. It really does remind me of the period described in The Sorrow and the Pity. And while much of the American public might not be emotionally on Israel's side, there's this enforced apathy here where they're just not hearing about it, and all the calls to end this are being drowned out so that there can't be the kind of pressure that we need to see on our government.
Well, one factor as well is coercion and intimidation from
Yeah.
the Trump administration. I mean, look at this headline from Politico. Trump team pauses new student visa interviews as it weighs expanding social media vetting. So now, if you want to get a student visa, those, the interview process has been paused around the world. And there's a new order out from the Trump administration, which basically says that before even an interview, there's going to be social media vetting, including for so-called anti-Semitism. I mean, what that means? That means for criticizing Israel. But some good news to report, because, in a bleak time. You mentioned Asa Winstanley, the British journalist,
Yeah.
the LGBT Intifada. His home was raided, and his devices were seized. Well, a British court has just ruled that was done unlawfully, and has ordered the return of all of his devices, which he actually got back today. So it's at least one small piece of good news in a very grim time.
Yeah, I've also seen this story. Yeah, that is good news, and we need to clear Kit Clarenberg's name as well, who also faced the same kind of treatment from British counter-terror police when he returned home. As our colleague at the Grayzone, we need to see Richard Medhurst cleared. We need to see the terrorism charges dropped against the Filton 18 from Palestine Action. And we have a piece going up shortly at the Grayzone, which outlines showing internal, mostly redacted emails between the British Crown Prosecution Service and the Israeli embassy, that the Israeli government has been lobbying successfully the British government, the Attorney General's office, to enhance charges against British citizens protesting this genocide, as well as advising Israeli officials on how to avoid arrest warrants. And I assume that the Israeli pressure has also led to these raids on Asa Winstanley, Sarah Wilkinson, the attack on Richard Medhurst. So we're looking at one of the biggest foreign influence scandals in recent times. Again, only alternative media is reporting on it. And here's a story closer to home. Trump administration wants to photograph everyone leaving the U.S. by car. This has been justified by Marco Rubio as trying to prevent student protesters who are here on visas or with permanent residency, green cards, from getting out. I mean, even this has a Palestine angle. It's complete insanity. And it is, Aaron, as you said, the intimidation factor. They're trying to intimidate people into silence on this genocide, which I think will only lead people into some into more radical modalities. We'll talk about that a little later. Anything you want to add here?
Well, no, and we have so many other topics to get to, including we want to get into your recent trip to Iran. But should we talk about the shooting in D.C. at the embassy, of the two Israeli embassy officials?
Yeah, we can do that now or later. I guess let's do it now because haven't had much to say about it. Haven't been able to say much. I mean, here's the New York Times. 2 Israeli embassy officials were assassinated, I would say, at a ceremony at a DC Jewish museum. The New York Times frames it this way. This is like a headline. This wasn't even a op-ed. The New York Times did have an op-ed by an Israeli embassy official saying this is just anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. But here they're saying slaying outside DC Jewish museum is part of global surge in anti-Semitism. Groups that monitor hate crimes said the Hamas attack in 2023 and the subsequent war had helped fuel tens of thousands of anti-Jewish incidents globally, including cases of verbal abuse and violence. I don't know. I read the shooter. The shooter is Elias Rodriguez, a young man who shouted "Free Palestine" and emphasized that he did this as retaliation for the genocide in Gaza. I read his manifesto, which was published at Ken Klippenstein's Substack, and Klippenstein got a visit from the FBI for publishing that. I read it. I couldn't find any trace of anti-Semitism there. Could you?
No, he was very clearly someone upset by the Gaza genocide, or at least that's what he says. And I didn't see any anti-Semitism in what he wrote. And of course, the New York Times is going to declare as fact that this is anti-Semitism because they've conflated, like everybody else, Israel with the Jewish people deliberately.
Yep. I mean,
Right.
these are just Jews. They're making it out to be like that they're just Jews who are just at a Jewish festival who don't have any affiliation with any government that is engaged in a genocide, and thereby conflating Jews with Israelis, which is in itself anti-Semitic, right? So I mean, you can read the manifesto for yourself, and it seems very clear what he was attempting to do, why he was attempting to do it, and that is just being conveyed. And it's something that, I'm not surprised took place. What I actually think about the shooting, it was adventurism. It was not strategic. It is likely to legitimize more repression against the Palestine solidarity movement in the US without leading to any pressure on the Israelis. At the same time, with no government taking any measure of accountability, like no governments are holding Israel accountable, with none, it opens the door for this kind of activity. And these are figures who were working for the Israeli government. Yaron Leshinsky, for example, I'm trying to pull up some of his tweets, who celebrated assassination again and again and again. I mean, this guy was a huge enthusiast of assassination. Let me pull up one of his tweets. Assassination being Israel's de facto policy in the Gaza Strip for all political opponents to avoid a diplomatic solution. 3 words, huge impact. God bless the IDF, declares Yaron Leshinsky, who was shot in D.C. This is referring to Yahya Sinwar's killing. There's so many tweets by him celebrating Israeli assassinations. Israel assassinates as policy. They have assassinated so many people. When I was in Iran, I met the son of a quantum theorist who was assassinated by Israel. They assassinate scientists. They assassinate common people. They assassinated political activists in Palestine. And they assassinate, of course, Hamas leaders to avoid negotiating with them. Yaron Leshinsky didn't seem like he assassinated anyone. He's not some high-level figure. It looked like low-hanging fruit. He's not surrounded by security, so someone targeted him. But you're working for a government that does this. And just on the anti-Semitism question, Yaron Leshinsky was not Jewish. Did you know that?
Yeah, he was Christian. He's a Christian Zio.
He was a Christian evangelical fanatic who thinks that this is the way to cosplay as a Jew, that the best way to be as a Jew is to work for the Israeli government and celebrate Israel's bloodshed and assassinations. So, I mean, it kind of complicates the narrative a little bit. What are your thoughts?
Well, if we actually believe that every human life is equal, then this incident just underscored that our establishment just doesn't care about human life when it comes to Palestinians. 2 people in DC were killed, and I mourn every loss of human life. I don't want to see anybody get hurt, but the incessant focus on 2 people being killed, while every single day Palestinians are being massacred en masse, it just underscores how normalized the genocide has become, and how it's considered routine that people in Gaza, whether they're children, women, men, their massacres, their murders every single day are just completely normalized. Whereas if 2 people from Israel, the genocidal state, get killed in obvious response, I mean, it's not as if this killing would have happened if not for the genocide. The contrast between the attention paid on 2 Israelis versus, tens and tens of thousands of Palestinians murdered every day is just so stark. It just underscores we have not even the most remote faith in what I thought was just what everyone claims to believe, which is that all lives are created equal. We just don't believe that, and this just underscored that to me.
Yeah, I mean, just the outpouring of indignation and rage, and the coverage by mainstream media of 2 people being killed while there were just scores of children being barbecued in Gaza, like small children just turning up charred, and it doesn't even register. Kind of, it makes the racism pretty apparent and abundant. Here's Yaron Lashinsky again, celebrating assassination. If the Houthis continue to fire missiles toward the state of Israel, they will suffer painful blows. We will hunt down and eliminate Abdul Malik al-Houthi in Yemen as we did with Dave Sinwar and Nasrallah. Houthis have no idea who they're messing with. I mean, there's so many Israelis who work for the Israeli government or who served in the Israeli military who have not only said these words, but who have boasted about war crimes that they've committed on social media, who've showed themselves in the homes of people that they've killed, even tweeted video of themselves sniping at people and animals in the Gaza Strip, vandalizing homes, blowing up homes, and they're going on vacation around the world. They're going, I see them like in Central America. I would see Israelis at this one particular hostel, and you would just, the vibe of the hostel was just like violent. You could just feel it. And they travel separately from everyone else in packs, and they sing their army songs on the beach, and they act like they're just normal people who don't have blood on their hands that could not be concealed by all the perfumes of Arabia. And I would prefer something like the Hind Rajab Foundation is doing, which is to hold them legally accountable and to compel governments like the government of Brazil to arrest them and hand them over for international prosecution, all of them, than to some violent alternative. I'm not involved in violence. It's not the reason that violence is taking place is because of Israel's assassination policy and the failure of all governments to stop it. But I'm not surprised that this is happening. And if Israelis want to implicate themselves so much by identifying with the slaughter that they carried out, by tweeting about it, by advertising it on Instagram, then they should be prepared to face the consequence, because billions of people around the world are utterly disgusted. And then finally, and again, I oppose the violent consequence. There should be a legal consequence. There has to be a legal consequence. Finally, to Zionists, if you've been celebrating and with glee, pagers blowing up in children's faces in Lebanon, if you have been cafelling about assassinations in Iran, in Gaza, if you've been masturbating to mass death, if you've been tweeting out images of the destruction of Gaza with FAFO attached to it, then you don't get to play the victim here. The victimhood act is over. The performance is over. No one takes you seriously anymore, and no decent person will have any sympathy for you after what you've done for the past year and a half. It's over.
This post here from Jihad Abu Salam sums up Zionism to me. This may be the first genocide where the perpetrators and their supporters openly push to annihilate and starve a people while demanding validation, acceptance, inclusion, safe spaces, and lived experience affirmation.
Yeah.
That sums it up.
Yeah, they're not just demanding it. They're trying to change the laws and structures of institutions. They're trying to change the laws of our country and change the structures of institutions to impose their own presence on everyone else, their own repulsive presence. Yeah. And they're trying to reclassify discrimination in order to prosecute their critics. So it's not just like they're demanding inclusion, they're imposing themselves. So, I had actually said in another interview, it hasn't come out yet. I think I gave an interview to TRT because I was briefly in Istanbul, that I thought after this war was over, after the ceasefire, there would be a kind of the global retribution against Israel coming from like global civil society. But I mean, who's to say it won't happen now? And, the way to head that off and the proper way to handle things, if we lived in a civilization, would be for institutions like, I don't know, the International Olympic Committee to do what it did to Russia and ban Israel from all competitions. But that's not happening. No institution is stepping up. So then you have like, you'll have radical people, including people with possible mental illnesses, lashing out because there's no recourse. And that's dangerous. But it's the fault of our elites. I don't know how much more I can say about it. If you want to add anything.
No, I think we should move on. I mean, we could speak about Gaza, and I mean, no matter what we do, it's not going to be sufficient to capture the horror of what's happening. But I think, given the time constraints we have, we should move on to your trip to Iran.
Yeah,
it was your first time there, and it comes at a time when the Trump administration and Iran are engaged in negotiations over a new nuclear deal. The Trump team seems to have not made up its mind. Steve Witkoff, just as he has with Gaza and Hamas, keeps going back and forth. First, he said that some enrichment is acceptable. Then, as soon as the neocon, pro-war, pro-Israel lobby freaked out, he reneged on that and said that actually Iran can't have any enrichment at all, which for Iran is a red line of its own, because they assert the right to peaceful enrichment. So you were just in Tehran. You were in other areas of the country. What were your impressions?
Well, and for anyone watching now, feel free to submit questions. Super chats might get more attention about my trip to Iran. I was looking for an opportunity to go to Iran. I have been for some time, and I thought this was actually the best time to go because of the possibility of conflict, but also because of the negotiations, which were, delaying or postponing the conflict that Trump had threatened. And I was invited to the Sob Film Festival, which had so many of our friends participating and people that we respect, former EU lawmakers like Mick Wallace, Claire Daly, George Galloway, Glenn Deason, the academic in Norway, was there. Propaganda and Company, Ahmed Sadruddin showed up. I went with my close collaborator, Anya Parampil. So it was great. Also great to travel with a woman, because it gives you kind of a more intimate understanding of women's issues in Iran, which I'll talk about in a second. So many of our fellow guests at Judge Napolitano were there, other than Judge. And so I thought, I want it to be, if I'm going to be doing panels, it should be with credible people I respect. And they were great. They were great panels for the 4 or 5 days that this festival took place. It was a film and broadcast festival that brought out like the whole of the Iranian broadcast industry, including people who make children's shows. There was an awards ceremony for like best animation, best article on this. But basically, outside of that, the festival took up a very small minority of my time. And I didn't have like a minder. I was able to get access, whether by requesting it from my hosts or just by going out. And I was never limited in anything I wanted to do. And by the end of the trip, just to answer your question quickly, I was able to get access to some diplomats seasoned diplomats who had very detailed knowledge, inside knowledge of what was taking place through the negotiations. This was also partly because the Iranian foreign ministry was hosting something called Tehran talks. And they brought out President Pezeshkian and Javad Zarif to engage with scores of diplomats and like think tankers from Washington and diplomats from around the world. So on the outskirts of that, I was able to speak to some people about what was actually taking place. And there was just this bewilderment among the negotiators about Team Trump and what their agenda was and why they seemed to be so confused and almost incompetent. Steve Witkoff was described as someone who is incredibly distracted. He had too much on his platter. He didn't understand the issues very well. And whenever they would seem to come to some kind of agreement or make momentum, this is all about the nuclear issue, Witkoff or someone else would go back to Washington and make deeply damaging statements, as Steve Witkoff did when he declared, I guess 2 Sundays ago on ABC's This Week, that the red line for the US is 0% enrichment for Iran. But this is not what they were saying in Oman, in Muscat, Oman, where the indirect talks were taking place. So the Iranian diplomats were just like, what's going on there? They were asking me for some kind of insight into this administration that they couldn't understand. And so they began to conceive a theory that what Trump was actually doing, just trying to create chaos to destabilize Iran's economy and to drive a wedge between the population of Iran and the government, because that was happening. Like I would see in real time how the currency would fluctuate with each statement Trump made. A friend of mine and Anya's said to us, your hotel would have been cheaper tonight if these negotiations weren't taking place, because Trump had made some damaging statement which weakened the Iranian rial. By the way, I paid our own way there, in case anyone's wondering, and didn't accept any compensation to be in Iran. So by participating in the economy, I actually got to see how nightmarish it can be for Iranians and how vulnerable they are during these negotiations. Most members of the Iranian public I spoke to had no hope for a deal because they understand the US as a country that's under the sway of Zionism and has this historic relationship with Iran where they see Iran as like the ultimate evil. And why would anyone trust the US, and especially the Trump administration, after the 2015 JCPOA, which, as Iranian diplomats would say openly on the record to me, provided no sanctions relief, that did nothing for their economy, and then led them back into maximum pressure that culminated with the assassination of Major General Qasem Soleimani, which was deeply traumatic for Iranian society. So from my point of view, after being there, having this kind of access, the prospect is bleak for a durable deal with the US, and Iran is prepared for that. They're prepared because they have survived maximum pressure. Their economy is battered and the population desperately wants sanctions relief, but it's a functional society and they've been able to advance technologically and militarily under sanctions, which I can talk about. And then there's also this mentality after 5 decades of the Islamic Republic kind of being under siege, of just fearlessness, that they've experienced war. They're not afraid of it. So it looks from my point of view, I would be surprised if there was a deal. And many people think that's a good thing because of the way the last deal went. The last deal was damaging in many ways to Iranian society. The principalist camp was critical of the reformist camp for seeking a deal because they consider the reformists to be kind of a front for Iranian financial elites, and they think that they just want a deal in order to make themselves wealthier at the price of sacrificing Iranian sovereignty and weakening Iran's relationships with its allies in the region, the resistance axis. So there's that as well. But for sure, everywhere I went, I was interacting with people in the streets all the time because it's very rare to see a visitor there now. Everyone was very clear with me that they wished that the sanctions would go away. I published a video of myself in Isfahan, which is probably the most beautiful city I've ever visited. It's incredible. It's like Venice, but more ancient without tourists. And there's a water issue in the central plateau of Iran. And a lot of water has been diverted from the main river in Isfahan to, farms and industrial needs. And when I was there, they opened up the dam, the river came through, and everyone came out to enjoy the river. And the bridges of the river have these kind of caves under them. They're ancient bridges. And in these kind of underneath the bridges, people gather and sing because the acoustics are perfect for singing. And I was filming like with my phone, a singer and about 150 people standing around, and he pulls me in because he sees that I'm a foreigner, then learns that I'm an American. He sings a song for me, and it's like a sing-along, and everyone's singing. And at the end, he says, we wish, here's hoping for an end to the sanctions. He just says it, and everyone starts cheering. So, I mean, there you have it. The sanctions are so painful for people and they've distorted their economy. And you talk to middle-class people, they just can't buy new things. They can't, a young couple can't get a new car, but they work so hard. And it's because of the inflation brought on through US financial terrorism. So that's the main issue. That is like the main issue in Iran right now. And, they would love for a deal to relieve them of those sanctions, but I don't think it's coming.
And that's the playbook. We've seen this for so long now. The U.S. uses its financial power, its control of the global financial system to make entire populations suffer. And from the point of view of like a hegemon, it's such a brilliant exercise of state power because you don't have to send troops to a foreign land to keep them subjugated. You just have to do some paperwork, and you can cut off entire populations from the basics that they need to survive. We just saw that now in Syria, where Trump just lifted the sanctions on Syria because, as he said, they were brutal and crippling, but he said they served an important function. He didn't define what that function was, but we all know what it was. It was regime change. Make a country collapse until it submits and overthrows the government that the U.S. wants gone, because the government is outside the control of U.S. hegemony. So that's the playbook right now in Iran. And you get access on the ground by going there to how it works. And the people, who aren't involved in policy and, just want to live normal lives, all they can see is what's making their lives impossible. And, they're not, obviously at the top of their mind is not geopolitical considerations about standing up to U.S. hegemony. They just want to have comfortable, decent lives. And this is the playbook the U.S. can deploy every time because they have so much power through their control of the global economy.
They have a lot of power to wreck people's lives, but they do not have the power to, what I determined, and could be proven wrong, they do not have the power to break the Islamic Republic. This is a very talented, highly educated society. It has a lot to draw on. It has an enormous production base. Its manufacturing capacity is amazing. Iran has a robust car industry. They make their own cars. They also make their own ballistic missiles, which can reach Tel Aviv in 7 minutes, as I saw at the Iranian Aerospace Park. If you haven't seen my video from there about the development and advancement of Iran's ballistic missile, drone, Air Force, and space program, go take a look. It's like a public museum that I was able to get access to just by asking. And it really gives you insight into just the innovative capacity of a society that's under siege, that's under sanctions. No one helped them develop their ballistic missiles program. Only Hafez al-Assad Syria provided some support early on, but every other government refused to help Iran. I was given access. I was able to go on a tour with a group from the festival of academics, journalists, former lawmakers of the Tehran nuclear research facility, which was an active civilian nuclear reactor in the middle of Tehran, which was originally developed with US assistance through the Atoms for Peace program under first initiated, I think, by Eisenhower, then through assistance from, I think, Stanford University under the Shah. The Shah prioritized nuclear energy and also had some interest in a nuclear weapons program, because nuclear energy gives your country, if you're like a mid-level power like Iran with a highly talented, educated population and a large population, it gives you a competitive edge over your regional neighbors, and you're able to export that edge. And so even the Shah wanted this. And under the Islamic Republic, this research facility, as I learned, just touring like a museum that they have, and then engaging in a kind of question and answer session with the spokesman for the Iranian Atomic Energy Association, whose name is Behruz Kamovandi, veteran Iranian diplomat of 5 decades of service in the Iranian Foreign Service. They are very proud of what they've been able to achieve through nuclear enrichment. And it all relates to civilian applications, preventing mites from infesting agricultural products, treating medical devices, producing fluid for PET scans to detect cancer, producing over 200 anti-cancer drugs and other therapeutic products through a company called PARS, which is sanctioned by the United States. They've been able to develop fairly advanced medical treatments of cancer and other lethal diseases without any outside assistance. And they're mining all their uranium at home, and they're training tens of thousands of Iranians in nuclear technology. What they want to do is diversify their energy industry, because there have been, 2-hour power blackouts, something Trump exploited in his speech in Riyadh to attack Iran. And so far, only the facility at Fordo supplies any energy, and it only accounts for 1% of what's on the Iranian grid. So they want to increase that. But there's another issue. They've lost so many nuclear scientists to Israeli assassinations, including the person they refer to him as the Oppenheimer of Iran, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was assassinated by a remote-controlled drone machine gun stationed by Israeli Mossad assets on a highway in Iran to attack his convoy back in 2020. Losing someone of that caliber and then giving up on the program that he developed, that you've made all these advances in, it means that he died in vain. It means that all these scientists have died in vain, and they're not going to allow that to take place. So it's an absolute red line for Iran to maintain enrichment, and they are willing to abide. It was clear to me they were willing to abide by their obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Israel does not, but they're not going to stop enriching. And I don't believe that Israeli strikes can actually stop their nuclear program. It just doesn't seem likely or possible. And they will lead to regional, it will lead to some kind of regional war if Israel even attempted that.
And what about the demands on Iran that they stop supporting resistance groups to Israel? I mean, how much of that is a factor in these talks? And it's my understanding that basically that's also been a red line for Iran for a long time. I mean, that's why in the original Iran nuclear deal, it wasn't even mentioned, because Iran refused. Obviously, Iran's been pressured for a long time to basically give up on the acts of resistance. But for them, that's also been a long time red line.
It is a red line, as are the long-range ballistic missiles. Iran will not give them up. It means giving up deterrence and opening the door for regime change. They're not going to let it happen. But talking to Iranian diplomats, they told me that entering the negotiations with Trump in Oman, they were more pessimistic, and they soon realized the Trump administration wasn't placing these issues on the table. They were only focused on the nuclear issue. And that made them more optimistic. And Israel has tried to compel Trump to place ballistic missiles on the table and supporting Hezbollah, but they haven't done it, along with him pushing the Libya model. But you can clearly see why they won't do that. It relates to their strategic depth, deterrence, and touring the martyrs' cemeteries, as I did in Isfahan and Tehran. You can watch my video with Professor Mohammed Marandi, who lost so many of his friends during the 8 years long Iran-Iraq war, what's known in Iran as the War of Holy Defense. He took me to the graves of his friends he lost in very consequential battles like Karbala 5. That is another thing. I mean, it emphasizes the sacrifice they've made. And I would also happen upon or go to graves of IRGC commanders who had fought through those wars and were then tasked with supporting Iran's allies in Lebanon, like Hezbollah, and were killed there. General Neil Forshan, for example, was with Hassan Nasrallah when he was killed. I visited his grave in Isfahan, and there were pilgrims. People would come up and start watering the flowers on his grave, just random people, and say prayers for him. These are I don't want to say sacred figures, but very revered figures in Iran. And they're seen as defending their homeland by supporting these allies. So they're never going to give that up. If they do, it will mean regime change is already taken place or is about to take place. And on another kind of related issue, regime change issue, I don't think there's I don't see a color revolution taking place anytime soon. The Mahsa Amini Women, Life, Freedom color revolution attempt failed to dislodge the Islamic Republic, and it turned very violent. And this is not acknowledged in Western media. It was a very traumatic event for Iranians. Over 50 police officers were killed. Many besieged members were killed. There was one incident where a young man stabbed 3 of them to death. The besieged were mostly unarmed. Besieged are like young people who volunteer to maintain the revolutionary spirit and to kind of stand guard. I actually met 2 besieged members who were like just young guys who one of them was carrying a motorcycle helmet. They were wearing short sleeve shirts. They looked like, any other guys. They were very friendly and weren't like, they were motivated more by the ideological cause, and they didn't seem like, street militants or militia members. But anyway, that took place. It was very painful for Iranian society. And one of the outcomes that I saw, which was surprising to me, and I think would be surprising to any Westerner who has absorbed so much propaganda, is how so many women no longer wear the headscarf in public. And it's not really enforced. It's not vigorously enforced. Anya would have to wear it for if there was a panel or something official, you're walking through a hotel. It's but you basically, women just keep it around their neck, and you see them out in the streets in Tehran not wearing it. I saw the same thing in Isfahan, which is, maybe not as liberal of a place as North Tehran. And the state seems to have kind of relaxed their enforcement because they are denying a card that the West can put on the table to inspire a color revolution. They don't want to deal with it. And they also have pushed back on organic grassroots protests demanding that the headscarf be enforced by pro-revolutionary, more religious elements, and said, let us handle it. This is an issue for us, the government or the state, to handle, not for you to handle, because they want to reduce tension between the secular segment of the public and the religious segment of the public. And both are very large. I mean, there's a large segment of the Iranian public that is secular, middle class, supports the reformist elements. And there's a segment that's religious and is deeply dedicated to the revolution. And the West clearly wants to exploit or create any friction it can between those elements. Something I noticed, that I was told is more frequent now is younger people who are secular and religious congregating together and having friendships in ways they didn't in the past, which, is encouraging to see. And major fulcrum point between secular and religious is the issue of Palestine, which is sort of tragic, because you see in our own society, if you go to a protest, Palestine solidarity protest, you'll see like religious Muslims there, maybe even some Neturei Karta, like Orthodox Jews, and then lots of secular Marxist-minded kinds of people. So it kind of brings them together. But on one of my last nights in Tehran, I went to a cafe called Palestine Cafe. And it's made to look like the cafes in Bethlehem and Ramallah, with the kind of, white rocks on the walls. There are keys in the main salon signifying, Palestinian displacement, and then photographs in the basement salon of one wall is like the secular heroes of Palestine, like Edward Said, Ahed Tamimi, and, a lot of the great intellectuals. And then on another wall are the Islamist resistance figures, Hania, Khader Adnan. But you look at the clientele, and in many cafes in Tehran, you'll see a lot of women not wearing the headscarf, but there, most women were wearing headscarves. And I was told that the people who come to Palestine Cafe tend to be more religious, more supportive of the Islamic Republic, because the middle-class secular public doesn't trust anything that the Islamic Republic's leadership says. And so when they say that Palestinians are oppressed and we need to support them, including militarily, they will reflexively reject that just because their leadership says that. And so they're not as supportive of Palestine. And anywhere I went, I would ask people, what do you think about Palestine? And that kind of tended to be the pattern. The more secular people were, the less interested they were. And some of them would say, I'm an Iranian nationalist, but we should not be spending this money to support people who are far away, who don't have anything to do with us. It's like what we would say about Ukraine. A lot of that is the byproduct of the successful Western propaganda networks like BBC Persia and Iran International, which is run out of London but is funded by Saudi Arabia. The BBC Persia is the more sophisticated one, and they do tons of reporting on how much Iran and is spending on the IRGC Quds force and how much it's spending on Hamas and so on. And then, they have problems at home, the health sector, the education sector is underfunded. So they're trying to drive that wedge. And to some extent, it's succeeding.
Well, yeah, and that's also, I think, a byproduct of the sanctions and all the isolation that Iran has faced over the years because of its stance against Israel. Like, for that, they've been made to pay a price, and the price is primarily borne by the population. And so, again, in that situation, ordinary people are going to wonder, why they're involved in this conflict that feels far away to them.
Yeah. Question, what was the country's infrastructure like? Very good. Better than I expected. The roads were very good that I drove on. The Tehran was meticulously clean. The air quality was horrible, and we all developed kind of like respiratory infections by the end. In the winter, I was told like sometimes school is closed because the air quality is so poor, but the streets are spotless. Traffic is horrible. Obviously, the highway system probably needs to be expanded. I took the Tehran metro from the north all the way to the last stop in the south, which is where I met Professor Morandi at the Behesht Ezara Martyrs Cemetery. So I got to see, what the subway was like during rush hour. It's pretty crowded. People complain about it being too crowded, but it was spotless. It was completely clean, safe. They don't get enough cars online because of sanctions. Like it's hard to repair the cars. And so they could be running more cars, but there is a functional subway system. The roads were pretty good, very crowded. Someone's asking about the relationship with Russia and Turkey. Can't go into that too much, except that my sense was that Iran trusts China much more than Russia. And the relationship with China is very strong. All the construction equipment that's active in Iran that you would see building anything comes from China. Chinese cars are being retailed. If you go to any shopping mall in Iran, I even went to a rest stop on the way to Isfahan in the middle of the desert, and there were new Chinese electric vehicles and luxury cars on display there. You see them everywhere. So Chinese cars are like the new top of the line. Most cars on the road are French Peugeots. And technological cooperation with China is at an unprecedented scale. I think Iran is being forced to recognize that BRICS is the future. When I was there, it was the first anniversary of the death of Ibrahim Raisi, the president who brought Iran into BRICS, and is remembered very fondly for that. He's remembered especially fondly by the working class of Iran. And there's still, by the way, a pretty strong debate on whether he died in a helicopter crash as a result of an accident or whether it was some kind of assassination, along with the then foreign minister, who is known as the foreign minister of resistance because of his strong relationship with Hezbollah, Ansarullah, and Hamas. That was one of his signal achievements, was BRICS. And yeah, the Belt and Road Network goes through Bandar Abbas port, and there are all sorts of new highways and infrastructure facilities being built that you can see in Iran. So Iran is a key artery of the Belt and Road Network. How was the support of government in IR? Like, how many people supported the government? I can't really speak to that. What I can say is that everybody had a different opinion that I spoke to, including people who worked for the government, and that people were not afraid to tell me how they felt about the government, to the point where I would meet people in the street who would openly spout Israeli propaganda and call for the Shah to return. And they were not afraid to say that in the street. I kind of assumed they were in the minority, but everyone has a different opinion. There's massive criticism of the government. What you won't hear with people anywhere within the pro-government spectrum, including like anyone even in the reformist camp, is criticism of the leader. There tends to, what I sensed was more support for the leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, than the elected government. And then, with the different, governmental camps, the reformist and principlist camp, between them, there's just like the same level of antagonism and acrimony that you get between the Democrats and Republicans in the US. Many people were more supportive of the revolution, likened the reformists to the Democrats. The situation of Iranian Jews, I got to meet with a few Jewish communal leaders, and their situation is fine. They're doing well. Many of them are wealthy and doing well in Iran's political system and economy. They seemed comfortable. They're in some ways more protected than Jews in other countries. they have after the Iranian Revolution, they were given constitutional protections for the first time. But the main issue is that, not the main issue, but one issue that I guess comes from the outside is that most Iranian Jews outside Iran are Zionist. And you saw like the fanaticism, Aaron, of Iranian Jews in Westwood when they were attacking protesters at UCLA. Like they were the ones wielding pipes, attacking them. In Israel, there's like 200,000 of them. They tend to vote for the right wing there. And what they'll say is that the Iranian Jews inside Iran are compelled to make anti-Zionist statements and anti-Israel statements in order to protect themselves. And, I talked to them, engaged with them about that. And some of them seem very sincere in their anti-Zionism. I think it has to do with just being in a different kind of media environment and seeing the situation in Palestine from a different angle. But there may have been also, an element of insincerity. And one communal leader said, yeah, there are differing opinions among us on Zionism. The main thing is they're the second largest Jewish community in the Middle East outside of Israel. They've been able to hold on, unlike Jewish communities that were destroyed thanks to the foundation of Israel and or basically dissolved in the Arab countries. And they're doing fine, and they're walking around openly wearing kippahs. There are Jewish symbols on their synagogues, and they're not being vandalized. They're not being attacked in the street. I identified openly as Jewish there, told people without any hesitation that I was Jewish, and never encountered any hostility to that at all. So I think they have been misjudged very badly, but the situation of Jews is more complicated than I was going to be able to understand without like living among them. It's still amazing that they're able to hold on there. And, it was inspiring to be with them. And they're operating with a completely different perspective than Jews in the West are, where we're supposed to just be filled with anxiety every day about our position here in the US and on guard constantly for anti-Semitism. That's not the way that they're functioning inside Iran, inside an Islamic Republic at this point. Do most Iranian citizens recognize how the US is trying to stir up discontent and fan the flames of war? Yeah, I can't say I can't quantify public opinion. There is an Iranian pollster named Ibrahim Mohseni who has done some incredible work on Iranian public opinion with the University of Maryland. And look up any poll he's done for answers. And I'm actually planning to interview him later this week to get answers to those questions. What I would say was that I did get to interact with a fairly broad cross-section of the Iranian public, and those who are more secular and more middle class and younger, especially younger, do not seem as concerned about the effect that regime change could have. They only know life under the Islamic Republic and don't know what an alternative would be. And, it's something I saw in Venezuela as well. Young people growing up under sanctions, addicted to social media, seeing what's happening in the West. They want access to that, and they can't imagine that things could possibly get any worse. And so a lot of young people in Venezuela have turned away from Chavismo, but I would tell them that for sure, life will be not what you expect with regime change. And with Iran, I mean, just one of the people who had political education that I spoke to, whether they were secular or religious, those with more political education valued Iran's independence and understood that the independence came post 1979. So really it was a question of political education. And social media, as well as BBC Persia, which everyone watches on private satellite, has been a very effective mechanism at breaking down revolutionary political education and enticing people into believing that regime change will lead to some kind of paradise of personal and political freedom. I think the issue that Iran faces also, like, one of the same issues that Russia could face is balkanization if regime change takes place, and balkanization leads to civil conflict, civil war, and that's something that I think those who understand the stakes of regime change are very worried about, or would be worried about.
Well, I don't see how you achieve regime change in Iran without invading it with ground forces. The sanctions, obviously, as you've talked about, have caused a lot of suffering, but will that lead to, widespread collapse in Iran? It doesn't seem like it would to me. And so how do you impose the conditions for regime change in Iran without sending in U.S. troops, which I just don't think is going to happen?
No, it's not. It would require more troops than the U.S. currently has.
Yeah.
And, at least 20% of the Iranian public is just hardcore, existentially in support of the Islamic Revolution. And that's a large number of people. And there isn't the same amount who are willing to die to topple the government.
Yeah.
And I think, the more the U.S. relaxes the strangulation siege of Iran, the more the public liberalizes, but also Iran becomes stronger as a society and the government achieves more. The Islamic Republic achieves more validation because it's able to provide more to the public. And that's something the U.S. can't allow to have happen. They can't allow the power of a good example to take root, especially in the middle of Eurasia. So the future for Iran, clearly, from my point of view, was BRICS. And also, I had some conversations with people working in the private sector who believe that they are developing the more sophisticated modalities for evading or for avoiding sanctions and doing trade with countries outside of the SWIFT system, which is basically U.S. financial hegemony. That the government actually isn't finding these solutions. It's coming from the private sector because the private sector simply has to. So really, it's like a matter of time, I think, before we see the demise of U.S. financial hegemony or financial terrorism, whether or not they make a deal.
It's just amazing how everyone has just come to accept that the U.S. is this global dictator that can basically decide whether economies can function or not simply with a stroke of a pen because of its control of the financial system. And no one, or, at least in our political system, no one challenges sanctions. The only reason they challenge sanctions is if they work or not. The efficacy.
Yeah.
Not whether or not they're legitimate to begin with, but they're a form of extreme authoritarian control. Like nobody in Iran or Syria votes for whether or not Treasury Department officials in Washington can control the price of the food they eat, but yet that's the power that the U.S. gives to itself, and we're all supposed to treat that as if it's normal.
Yeah, and that it's an effective tool for bringing Iran to the table. Like the Democrats would always say, the sanctions worked; it got us to JCPOA, but it's not going to work again. And the world has changed, and it's just going to continue to change. You just cannot stop history. And a country like Iran that has just so many talented, educated young people is going to find a way.
Yeah,
I could see it.
Yeah, and it's also so big. It's such a massive country with such a very well-developed and ancient civilization. It's not like a tiny country that the U.S. can just strangle into submission. In Syria too, it wasn't just sanctions. It also took a 10-year dirty war that left so much of the country in ruins. So the idea that like regime change can happen in Iran just through sanctions, it's insane. But yet, and of course, the U.S. has no right to pursue it to begin with, but yet it's all they can cling to And unfortunately, I mean, the signals that you picked up in speaking to those diplomats in Iran is that a deal is not is not on offer when it comes to Trump, and it's too bad.
Yeah, I mean, as an American, I guess I would want a deal, and no one wants to see war, but it might actually be for the better to not have a deal, and it will leave the U.S. in the dust ultimately, with some suffering from Iran. I mean, well-connected people I spoke to expect a summer of confrontation in which Israel will engage in sabotage, violent acts, and seek to draw Iran into this escalation ladder, up the escalation ladder, because Israel has escalation dominance. It does, but it doesn't mean that Iran cannot deter. The main thing about how Iranian diplomats see Trump is, as I said, they tried to impute some rational motives to Trump, but the reality that they might not be able to understand is that Trump and his team are just so daft and so clueless that they have no idea. They might just actually not know what they're doing at all.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact that Steve Witkoff has 3 different portfolios: Iran, Gaza, Israel, and Russia, Ukraine. It's just like, who's ever heard of this before? First of all, he doesn't even have really a formal title. He's just an envoy. But yet he's supposed to somehow manage these 3 global crises and reach deals. I mean, no wonder nothing's happening on any of these fronts, including in Ukraine. Because how do you possibly give this much authority to one person who doesn't even have like a big staff? I mean, these are complex negotiations that I mean, if they were serious, they would be complex. But how can one person with a small staff possibly manage all 3 of these crises? And it's like, on the one hand, it's encouraging that Marco Rubio is not involved in any of them. Like, that's a positive step. I'm glad, because he's just a career neocon warmonger. But how is Steve Witkoff, no matter what his own intentions are, managed to accomplish anything, given how much responsibility he has in all 3 of these different crises?
Well, one of the things that concerned the diplomats I spoke to was that Rubio is getting involved and that there's this power struggle between him and Witkoff. Rubio feels like he's been reduced to a peripheral role in the administration. Who is this Witkoff guy? He was never an appointee, never confirmed, doesn't have like this long career in the Senate. And that Rubio has begun making statements as a negotiator. And so they don't even know who to listen to. And they are concerned about Rubio also because he is the creation of the neoconservative movement and has been deeply hostile to Iran throughout his whole career. But like with Witkoff, it's like, who is this guy? Like, we don't even know who he is. He was a real estate lawyer who was Trump's golfing buddy. And I mean, I think it's time to call bullshit on Steve Witkoff. Yeah. Like, I see all these alternative commentators praising him. Geopolitical commentators are saying, like, he's a breath of fresh air. I think enough is enough with Steve Witkoff. He's done enough damage. His negotiations with Russia have been a complete failure. He's misjudged or as Bush said, misunderestimated Vladimir Putin. And it's not coming back.
He's accomplished absolutely nothing. And by the way, also, Rubio is also sabotaging diplomacy with Venezuela. There was some recent agreement that Richard Grenell helped broker, and there was a promise that some sanctions would be lifted, and Richard Grenell secured that. And then Rubio intervened and got Trump to back off of reverse. And this is a very limited sanctions. This was about extending a Treasury Department license for Chevron to keep operating in Venezuela, and Rubio sabotaged that. So he's clashing with Richard Grenell on that front too.
Yeah, Grenell got Gusano'd. That's what you expect. And the diplomats told me that anytime they would issue some concrete proposal, it would take over a week for the U.S. to respond, and sometimes they just never would because Witkoff was too distracted. It's like one guy. I mean, I would be pretty distracted with that much on my agenda. So it's just the simplest explanation might be the truest one, which is that Team Trump has no idea what the hell they're doing.
I concur with that.
Which could lead anywhere. So I don't know. I'll have more insights on Iran as I, for throughout the next streams and as it comes back into the news. But the one final thing I would say is it was just like an awesome country. Just take politics out of it. It's just an awesome country to visit. I mean, it really feels totally unique. Like spending a few days in Turkey after Iran illustrated to me how much Western corporate culture can bring a country's culture down, because you just feel it when you're back in Turkey. You see the ads for all the corporate brands, the monoculture seeps into even a unique ancient city like Istanbul. But in Iran, you don't have that. They'll take Western brands and filter it through their own culture and churn out something totally unique. They produce everything on their own, or almost everything. And the beauty of the country is astounding. Like if you're in Tehran and it's polluted, you can go up to Mount Tochal in like an hour and just be in a village having dinner, like sitting above like a kind of waterfall in the mountains. It's amazing. Isfahan, again, maybe the most beautiful city I've ever been to. The people are phenomenal. Everyone is so welcoming. And everywhere I went, people would ask where I'm from. And I said, I'm from the USA. And there was no hostility at all. Everyone would emphasize. And actually, you go back to the standoff around the US Embassy in 1979, you'll see signs that say we hate the death to the US, but not its people. Like they would differentiate between the US and the American people even there. But in the streets, there was nothing but warmth and hospitality and a desire to get past the enmity. And it really is the case. It's our leadership that's the problem. It's our leadership, our elite, the neocons. That's our enemy. Iran is not our enemy. And that is something that I just felt when I was there. And you would too if you were able to go. Unfortunately, because of all this hostility, it's tough to get a visa. But Aaron, I hope you'll get to go there and see it for yourself and draw your own conclusions.
I hope to as well. It's always enlightening when you get to visit countries on the other side of the gun, like these global South countries that are targeted by Western hegemony. It's always eye-opening, and I'd love to see Iran one day.
Well, hopefully soon. And we published on our Substack site my panel and Anya's panel from the Sub Festival. They're great discussions. Alistair Crook was on mine along with Mick Wallace and Claire Daly, and Anya had some really great colleagues there. And I'll talk more during the next stream. I don't know. Do you want to do another segment or you want to wrap?
I think we should wrap
for
today and pick it up. There's a lot more to cover, but we can pick it up next time.
Yeah, I want to cover Syria as you wanted to do here, but it'll still be there.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to explain why Trump's negotiations with Russia have failed so miserably. So we'll pick up the slack next week. Glad it was great to be back after so long. Good to see you, and I guess you'll be in the UK for a little while.
I'll be back in the US on Thursday, so we can do another stream very, very soon. Not going to be a month-long delay like this one was. Yeah.
You don't have any more events or anything?
No.
All right.
No.
All right, good. Well, travel safe. We'll see you on the other side. Thanks everyone for watching, listening, subscribing to our YouTube channel, because we remain under heavy suppression. And you can subscribe to our newsletter at thegrayzone.com, or you can get all of our reporting in your email by subscribing to our Substack site. And you know where else to find us. You also like the stream. But thanks again for joining, and we'll see you all next week. Peace.
Peace.